Hey guys, it's Amber at NotableInk.com. Today I am participating in the StencilGirl Seth Apter Wow blog hop. I'm going to be sharing some stencil, embossing, and watercolor techniques today on 2 cards with a mixed media feel. Of course, every blog hop needs a giveaway. Be sure to visit my blog post and leave a comment for a chance to win one of 3 different gift cards. That link and details are down below. This is the StencilGirl Coffee Cup Rings stencil. I have done another project with this and I'll link that above in the upper right hand corner. I'm going to use this for both my projects along with 2 Seth Apter Trios. This is Metalz, which includes etched platinum, crusty copper, and weathered gold. These are gorgeous colors. I have samples of them on the top, which I just do on some cardstock and punch it with a circle punch, so that I know what the colors look like. And then I'm also using one of the colors from Seth Apter's Cosmic Trio. Today I'll use Blue Moon, but this trio also includes Space Dust and Sea of Tranquility. This is a color blend trio, so there's multiple different colors in each one of these. And you can see some of the color variation there. I used some purple tape and taped the stencil to a piece of watercolor paper. This is Saunders Waterford High White Cold Press paper. And I have the Wow embossing pad here. I'm going to press this onto the stencil to ink up the cardstock. And before I did that, I wanted to make sure that my ink pad was nice and juicy. So here I'm realizing that my re-inking tool is totally empty. So you can see it's a really cool roller ball. Fortunately, I have another one on standby, so I'm going to use that to just re-ink my ink pad. So you can see all the embossing gel inside, and you basically just roll this over your embossing pad to re-ink it. I really like to do this before I'm doing either like a really fine detailed stamp or maybe sentiments. Definitely before I'm going to go ink to paper, just to make sure things are really juicy so that I get a good impression. So I'll gently press this down a few times to make sure that I have good coverage on the paper, but I don't want to swipe it across because you can get ink underneath your stencil. I'll gently remove the stencil and set that aside for now. And I'm going to use crusty copper for these coffee rings. I thought that would be a perfect color. This crusty copper is exactly that. There's a texture medium in this embossing powder. There's a little bit of glitter and shine, definitely a copper metal, but there's also this really cool texture to it that you'll see when we emboss it. I'm just going to use my coffee filter to funnel all of that embossing powder back into the container. And usually, especially with a glitter powder or a texture powder, I'll start heating the cardstock from the back so that nothing blows away. And then I'll come to the front and complete the melting process. So you can see the powder change into that beautiful copper color. And look at the texture there. Such a pretty color. And I think it's perfect for the coffee rings. So I have a pocket palette here of Daniel Smith watercolors, and I'm going to start off with Naples Yellow. It's a super light, creamy yellow. I thought that would be kind of good for maybe almost like a latte. I probably could have used the buff titanium. That would have looked like cream, but I wanted a little bit more color than just cream. So I'm going to pop this down on my glass mat with that's a 12 round brush, and I'm going to do some ink smushing. So I'm just going to spray this a little bit with water just to get the pigments to move a little bit more. And I'm going to pounce the embossed panel right into that. So I just want some blotches, almost like spilled coffee. You've got the coffee rings. I thought some spilled coffee would be a nice effect to go along with that. So I'll pounce this into the ink spots a couple times, and then I want to go ahead and dry this. So I have my Wow heat tool on the lowest setting. I'm holding it anywhere between 6 to 8 inches away so that it doesn't warp the paper. I'm going to do another round of color, this time with burnt umber, which is a much darker brown, and I'll use the same technique. I'm going to spray that with water and then go ahead and do some ink smushing. Once I'm happy with the amount of color, I'll go ahead and dry that. Here I have a 12 round brush and just some clean, clear water. I wanted to add a blue background to this card. So I'm going to go all the way up into that heat embossed edge, right over some of the ink smushing that I did. And then I'll start to drop in some color. So for this, I'm going to use Daniel Smith Indigo. And I'll just drop in the color at the top, and then I'm going to tilt my watercolor paper so that the color can run down to the embossed edge. And I love this color. This is one of my favorite colors. And this paper, and the combination of the paper and the Daniel Smith watercolors, really any watercolors that I've used with this paper, they move so well. You know, the paper, of course, this is a wet on wet technique, so your pigments are generally going to run. But if you're struggling with watercolor and getting your pigments to move, really take a look at the paper that you're using. This is hands down my favorite watercolor paper. I like the high white version because it is whiter than most. And look how cool it is when those pigments just run down the paper and follow the track of that clean, clear water that was put down to begin with. So I'll go ahead and fill in a couple of these individual areas, or the interstices in between the coffee rings. And then the blue at the top is not nearly as dark as some of these areas that I've done here. So I will go back and add a second layer to the blue at the top as well. I'm using just one single color. It's the same color, that indigo. Here I just have clean, clear water on my brush, and look how easily those pigments reactivate with the water. So that's clean, clear water. It's just reactivated that pigment that I put down just a few minutes ago, and I'll just start adding more color up top. This time I'll bring the darker pigment further down the card, and you can still see how that pigment is moving. It gives it a nice organic feel. I'll fill in a couple more of the interstices, and then I'll set this aside to air dry so that it doesn't get any kind of warping from drying too quickly with a heat tool. I finished off the card with some confetti sequins and then also some sentiment strips from Simon Says Stamp. Here in the close-up pictures, you can really see the texture of the embossing powder and that metallic sheen. For the next card, I'm using the same paper and the same stencil. This time I'm using the single coffee ring, and I'm going to emboss it 4 times overlapping each other. So it kind of makes almost like a floral pattern. And this time I'll be embossing with Blue Moon from the Seth Apter Cosmic Trio. You can see all those kind of like clear crystals at the top there. Now, because this is a blended powder, you definitely want to shake up your powder before you sprinkle it on your project to make sure that you have even distribution of all the different colors and elements in the powder. I didn't pre-treat it with an anti-static powder tool, so I'll just knock off any excess with a dry paintbrush. And then I'll go ahead and melt this in the same way. I won't show the heat embossing every time, but I will show you where I place the stencil so you have an idea in case you want to recreate this. Sometimes looking at the end result, it's a little harder to tell how it was created. So I've got the 4 rings there, and I did heat emboss those in between each layer. To me, this started to look like a little bit like a dream catcher, so I decided to do some zentangle patterns inside of the embossing. So in each individual section, I'll do a couple different patterns. Pretty simple, almost like concentric rings, or rainbows, arcs, I guess you could say. The pattern that I'm doing now and the pattern that I will do next is called Tripoli. And you can fill the inside of Tripoli really anyhow you like it. But it's basically like a triangle shape with an arc around the edges. And then you fill in the center with whatever pattern you like. When you put those together in a repeating pattern, you get what you call a meta pattern, or an additional pattern that's created from the sum of the whole of all of them together. So this is traditional Tripoli right here, where you have the orb in the center. After you draw the orb, you just fill in the corners so that you get nice contrast. Look at the shine on that blue moon. I think it's so gorgeous. So to continue that dream catcher theme, I needed to have some tassels. So I decided to just drop some clean, clear water down from the dream catcher body. And then I dropped in some of that same indigo ink right into that. So Dropping the water first gives the pigments a track to go down. It gives you a little bit more control. It also prevents the pigment from absorbing directly into the paper where they may not move as much as they would with a wet on wet technique. So I'm just going to add more pigment to get it nice and dark, and then I get a splotch there, so I just flick it and I'm totally okay with that organic look there. So I decided that I would heat emboss this with etched platinum. That's from the Metalz Trio. So while the paint was still wet, I just went ahead and, while the majority of the paint is covered up by the etched platinum embossing powder, I do like that you can see some of the indigo paint kind of peeking through those drippy lines there. So here I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss this, and this is another one that has lots of really great texture and metallic shine to it. So my paper got a little bit warped. I'm just straightening that out. And then finally, as with any zentangle project, you want to add some shading. So I'll just show you a little bit of shading to each one of the elements. And to do this, you can use just a regular household pencil. That's what I'm using here, and a tortillon or paper stump. I tend to hold it more horizontal than at its point, so that you're using the side of the pencil and the side of the tortillon. I think you get a better blend that way and less harsh edges when you're putting down the graphite. And you can see just that little bit of graphite adds tremendous dimension. Right now it looks like the dream catcher is just kind of floating out in space, so I decided to add a background. So I dropped in some clean clear water to start with, and then I dropped in Pyroline Green, which is another Daniel Smith color. So here you can see clean clear water, and then I'll drop in that Pyroline Green, which is a really pretty, it's so pretty, you guys. I love this color. And I'm just going to keep adding color until I'm happy with it. I'm around the little tendrils that kind of fall down. I'm going to make it darker in there, like those are casting a shadow, and I'll bring in some deeper pigments at the top as well. So it's a good idea to pause and take a look at your work, see if you like it. I felt like I needed a little more shadow over here on the right hand side. So I'm just going to add a little bit more color over there for that casted shadow. And then same thing, I'm going to let this air dry on its own, and then I'll add some sentiments. This sentiment is from one of the reverse sentiment strips from Simon Says Stamp. And take a look at all the texture in those embossing powders. I think they're just so cool with the different colors in it and the texture, just so pretty. I hope you guys enjoyed my stop on the hop today. Be sure to visit my blog post so that you can leave a comment there and enter to win. If you're new to my channel and you like what you saw, I'd love to see you again, so hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing that bell so you don't miss any new inspiration. Here's a couple more videos for you before you leave, and I'll see you real soon.